The ice tunnels of Europa stretched endlessly beneath the moon's frozen surface, their crystalline walls reflecting the glow of Lieutenant Kira Winter's survey lights. Steam rose from the heated joints of her exploration suit as she carefully navigated the narrow passages, each step echoing through the ancient ice. Behind her, the tall, serpentine form of HFY moved with an almost liquid grace, the archaeologist's bioluminescent markings casting additional shadows on the tunnel walls. "These readings make no sense," HFY's melodious voice whispered through their private comm channel. "The energy signature resembles nothing in our database, yet it bears markers of artificial origin." The alien's four-fingered hand adjusted the settings on their scanner, compound eyes reflecting the holographic readout. Kira pushed a strand of dark hair from her face inside her helmet. After 3 years working together on the Joint Species Archaeological Survey, she'd learned to trust HFY's instincts. "Could it be related to the ancient structures we found in Sector 7, she asked, remembering the mysterious ruins that had first brought them to Europa. "No," HFY replied, their head frills rippling with excitement. "This is older. Much older." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. Kira's lights played across walls of pure ice, revealing layers of frozen history stretching back millions of years. But it was what lay at the chamber's center that made both explorers stop in their tracks. Rising from a pedestal of black stone that seemed impossibly out of place in the ice cavity was a sword. Its blade gleamed with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat, sending ribbons of color dancing across the chamber's frozen walls. Symbols unlike any human or alien script Kira had ever seen ran along its length, seeming to shift and change as she watched. "Impossible," HFY breathed, their scanner forgotten as they stared at the artifact. "The dating, this predates known human civilization by tens of thousands of years." Kira approached the sword slowly, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The closer she got, the more the weapon's pulse seemed to synchronize with her own heartbeat. "Yet it's clearly designed for human hands," she observed, noting the grip's dimensions. "Lieutenant Winters," HFY's voice held a note of warning. "We should wait for additional security measures before attempting any interaction with the artifact." But Kira barely heard her partner's words. The sword was calling to her, not in words but in feelings, in memories that weren't her own. She saw flashes of giant ships crossing the space between stars, of battles fought against darkness itself, of a time when humans were more than they were now. Her hand closed around the hilt. Light exploded through the chamber, so bright that even HFY's polarizing eye membranes couldn't fully compensate. The ice around them resonated with a frequency that made their teeth vibrate, and for a moment, reality itself seemed to blur. When the light faded, Kira stood holding the sword, its glow now a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat exactly. Knowledge flooded her mind, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to understand that everything humanity thought they knew about their history was wrong. "We need to get back to the ship," she said urgently, even as distant alarms began to sound through the ice tunnels. "They're coming." "Who?" HFY asked, already moving to secure their equipment. "Everyone," Kira replied, newfound knowledge burning in her mind. "The sword's awakening will have been detected by every major power in the galaxy. And they'll all want it for themselves." The ground beneath them trembled as the first explosions reached them from the surface. Kira gripped the sword tighter, ancient memories guiding her movements as she led them toward a passage that shouldn't have existed, a hidden way out created by those who had left the sword here millennia ago. "You know," HFY said as they hurried through the secret tunnel, their bioluminescence providing additional light, "in my species legends, there are stories of the Starborn, a race of beings who once shepherded the younger species of the galaxy, protecting them from threats beyond comprehension. They vanished long ago, leaving only myths and scattered artifacts of impossible power." Kira looked at the sword in her hands, its light illuminating their way forward. "Maybe they didn't vanish," she said softly. "Maybe they just forgot who they were." Above them, the ice of Europa cracked as ships from a dozen species descended, all seeking the power that had awakened from its long slumber. But Kira knew this was just the beginning. The sword hadn't chosen her by accident. It was time for humanity to remember its true heritage, and face the responsibility that came with it. The real question was the galaxy ready for humans to reclaim their destiny? The Helios, Kira and Zweigstal's research vessel, cut through the darkness between Europa and Mars, its stealth systems working overtime to mask their presence from the growing armada of ships filling the Jovian system. In the ship's small cargo bay, Kira sat cross-legged on the floor, the ancient sword laid across her knees, its steady pulse now a familiar rhythm in her mind. "Your neural patterns have changed again," Zweigstal observed, studying the holographic readouts floating around them. The archaeologist's natural bioluminescence had dimmed to match the ship's low-power running status. "The sword isn't just showing you memories anymore, is it? It's changing you." Kira opened her eyes, which now held tiny flecks of the same luminescence that ran through the sword's blade. "Not changing," she corrected. "Remembering. Humans weren't always what we are now. Something happened to us, long ago. Something that made us forget." The sword pulsed brighter, and suddenly the cargo bay vanished around them. They stood on the bridge of a vast starship, its walls lined with technology that made their most advanced systems look primitive. Through the view screen, they watched as a fleet of similar vessels engaged in battle with something. The enemy ships seemed to bend reality around them, their forms painful to look at directly. "The Void Dancers," Kira whispered, the knowledge flowing through her from the sword. "They came from between realities, threatening to unravel the very fabric of spacetime. Humanity, the Starborn, we were the only ones with the power to stand against them." The vision shifted, showing them scenes of human civilization at its height, cities that spanned planets, technology that could reshape worlds, and always the swords. Not just one, but many, each wielded by a guardian chosen to protect the younger races of the galaxy. "Incoming transmission," the ship's AI announced, breaking through their reverie. "Origin, the collective diplomatic vessel Light of Reason. They're requesting immediate surrender and transfer of the artifact." Zweigstal's head frills rippled with concern. "The collective doesn't make requests twice. Their next communication will be weapons fire." Kira stood, the sword humming with energy. "Let me talk to them. There's something they need to understand." Despite Zweigstal's concerned look, she opened the channel. A being of pure energy contained within an ornate mechanical frame appeared on their view screen. Lieutenant Kira Winters, the collective representative's voice resonated with artificial harmonics. "I am Overseer NX 379. You have taken possession of an artifact that belongs to all sentient species. Surrender it, and you will be generously compensated." "This sword doesn't belong to anyone," Kira replied, feeling ancient knowledge guide her words. "It chooses its bearer. And there's a reason it chose a human. Your species is young," NX 379 dismissed. "Barely out of planetary confinement. You cannot comprehend the power you now hold." The sword flared, and Kira felt her voice change, carrying echoes of those who had come before. "Young? No. Lost, perhaps. Sleeping. But no longer." She raised the sword, and suddenly every system on the collective ship went dark. When they recovered moments later, the Helios was gone, having jumped through a fold in space that shouldn't have been possible with their level of technology. "That was..." Zweigstal struggled to find the words. "You opened a quantum tunnel without any equipment. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible." Kira stared at the sword, still humming with power. "The technology we think is cutting edge? It's all echoes, Zweigs. Fragments of what we once knew, rediscovered piece by piece." She turned to her friend, her expression serious. "But there's a reason we forgot. The sword, it's showing me more. Something terrible happened. Something that made us choose to forget everything we were. The Void Dancers? No. Kira shook her head. We defeated them. This was something else. Something worse. And I think. She paused as another vision washed over her. I think it's still out there. Waiting. The ship sensors chimed, warning of multiple vessels entering their sector. The collective wasn't alone in their pursuit now. Ships bearing the marks of the hegemony, the Free Worlds Alliance, and dozens of other factions were joining the hunt. We need to get to Mars, Kira said suddenly, the sword's guidance clear in her mind. There's something there. Something left behind from before. A place where we can learn the truth. HFY moved to the navigation console, their fingers dancing across the controls. The fourth planet is currently under strict quarantine due to the recent archaeological discoveries in the polar region. Exactly, Kira smiled. Those discoveries? They're not Martian. They're ours. And they've been waiting for us to remember who we are. As the Helios changed course for Mars, Kira felt the sword's power surge through her again. More memories surfaced, of great responsibilities and greater sacrifices, of a time when humanity stood as guardians of reality itself. Whatever had made them choose to forget, whatever threat still lurked in the darkness between stars, it was time to remember. Time to wake up. The real question was, would they like what they remembered? The red dust of Mars swirled around the Helios as it descended through the planet's thin atmosphere. In the cockpit, Kira watched the sword's glow intensify as they approached the coordinates burning in her mind. Beside her, HFY monitored the sensor feeds, their bioluminescence dimmed with concentration. The quarantine fleet is still engaged with the collective vessels in orbit, HFY reported. But we have maybe 20 minutes before they notice us. We'll only need 10, Kira replied with a certainty that wasn't entirely her own. The sword's memories were becoming clearer now, less like dreams and more like lived experience. She could see the facility as it had been, before millions of years of Martian dust buried it. They landed in what appeared to be a natural crater, but as soon as Kira stepped onto the surface, the sword's light revealed the truth. Geometric patterns, invisible to normal sight, crisscrossed the ground beneath the dust. She walked to the center of the crater, each step precise, guided by ancient knowledge. The quarantine was established because they found impossible readings here, HFY said, following close behind. Energy signatures that defied known physics. But every expedition that tried to investigate vanished without a trace. Kira smiled grimly. They didn't vanish. They were redirected. The facility's defenses are still active after all this time. She raised the sword, its light cutting through the dust storm that had begun to gather around them. But they were never meant to keep humans out. The sword's pulse synchronized with the patterns beneath their feet. The ground trembled, and suddenly they were falling, no, descending, on a platform of pure energy. The dust and storm vanished as they passed through layers of ancient shielding, entering a vast underground complex. By the first light, HFY breathed, their scientific detachment forgotten in awe. They stood in a chamber that seemed to stretch for kilometers, filled with technology that made their most advanced systems look like children's toys. Pillars of crystalline memory matrices rose into darkness above them, while platforms of impossible materials floated in complex orbital patterns around a central spire. The Martian Nexus, Kira said, ancient memories flooding back. One of humanity's primary research facilities from before the forgetting. This is where we developed the technology to fight the Void Dancers. She approached a control interface, the sword guiding her movements. At her touch, the facility hummed to life, holographic displays filling the air around them with information in that same shifting script from the sword. Kira, HFY's voice was urgent. Multiple ships are entering the atmosphere. The collective found us. But Kira was barely listening. The facility's archives were opening to her, showing her the truth of humanity's past, and the terrible choice they had made to forget it all. It wasn't just the void dancers, she whispered, watching the records play out before her. There was something worse. Something we created. The images showed her scenes of horror, a weapon or perhaps an entity that humanity had developed in their war against the void dancers. Something that had turned against its creators, threatening not just humanity but the very fabric of reality. The quantum plague, she continued, the knowledge burning through her mind. It infected consciousness itself, turning our own power against us. We couldn't fight it, it was part of us. So we made a choice. The facility's archives showed her the final days of humanity's golden age. The desperate plan they had enacted, using devices like her sword to lock away not just their advanced technology, but the very memory of what they had been. They had chosen to devolve, to forget, to become less than they were, because being more had become too dangerous. A massive explosion rocked the facility. There through the outer defenses, HFY reported, checking their sensors. Multiple collective strike teams incoming. We have minutes at most. Kira turned from the archives, the sword blazing in her grip. But we didn't just hide, she said, new understanding flooding her. We left ourselves a way back. A way to remember when the time was right. She looked at the sword. When we were ready. The facility systems responded to her revelation, the floating platforms aligning into new configurations. The central spire began to pulse with the same light as her sword. Kira, HFY moved closer, their concern evident in their fluctuating bioluminescence. What are you going to do? What we prepared for, she replied, raising the sword. The quantum plague is still out there, sleeping like we were. The collective, the hegemony, they're all looking for weapons, for power. But this isn't about power. It's about responsibility. The sword's light began to spread through the facility, connecting with the spire, with the memory matrices, with systems that had waited millions of years for this moment. We forgot what we were because we had to, Kira said, feeling the power build around them. But now it's time to remember. Not everything, we learned that lesson. But enough. Enough to face what's coming. The facility thrummed with energy as the first collective forces breached the inner chambers. But they were too late. The process had already begun. Across Mars, across the solar system, across human space, something was awakening. Not the full power of the Starborn, that was too dangerous, too soon. But a fragment, a seed, a reminder of what humanity could be. What they needed to be. The real question was, what would they become this time? The battle above Mars lit up the space around Phobos like an artificial sunrise. The collective's warships, sleek and deadly, exchanged fire with a hastily assembled coalition of vessels from 24 species. These unlikely allies had united not to claim the power of the ancient human facility, but to prevent the collective from seizing it. Within the Martian nexus, Kira stood at the central spire, the sword pulsing in harmony with the facility's awakening systems. HFY worked frantically at a floating console, their bioluminescence flickering with concentration as they coordinated with the coalition forces above. The hegemony battlegroups have engaged the collective's eastern flank, they reported. The Free World's ships are maintaining a defensive line around the polar orbit. But the collective is still pushing through. Kira nodded, watching through the facility's sensors as the battle unfolded. The sword had shown her more than just humanity's past now, it had revealed the complex web of alliances and fears that defined the modern galaxy. The collective's rise to power had been built on harvesting and controlling ancient technologies. They couldn't allow humanity to reclaim their heritage. More ships emerging from quantum space, HFY announced. There, by the first light, they're nomad vessels. The massive ships of the reclusive nomad clans dropped into real space, their organic-looking hulls bristling with weapons that defied conventional physics. They had been absent from galactic politics for centuries, but now. They remember, Kira said softly. The sword is awakening more than just human memories. All the species that were there during the war against the Void Dancers, they're beginning to remember too. The facility's archives had shown her the truth. Humanity hadn't fought alone as the Starborn. They had taught other species, shared their knowledge, built alliances that transcended mere politics. The nomads had been among their closest allies, their ships built with human technology freely given. A new alert blared through the facility. Collective forces have breached the lower levels, HFY warned. They're using some kind of phase technology to bypass the ancient defenses. Let them come, Kira said, feeling the sword's power flow through her. They need to see this. The first collective strike team burst into the central chamber, their combat frames gleaming with stolen technology. Overseer NX-379 floated at their center, their energy form crackling with anticipation. Surrender the facility, the Overseer demanded. The power of the Starborn belongs to all species, not just humanity. You still don't understand, Kira replied, raising the sword. Its light filled the chamber, and suddenly every piece of technology the collective forces carried, all of it reverse-engineered from ancient artifacts, went dead. This was never about power. It was about responsibility. The sword's memories flowed through her, showing her the final truth. The quantum plague hadn't been just a weapon that turned against its creators. It had been the embodiment of humanity's hubris, their belief that they could control the fundamental forces of reality without consequence. The Starborn didn't fall, she continued, walking toward the Overseer as more memories crystallized. We chose to step back. To give the younger races a chance to grow without our shadow over them. But we left guardians, watchers, those who would know when it was time to return. The facility's spire pulsed, and holographic images filled the air around them. They showed scenes from across human space, ordinary people suddenly remembering fragments of what they once were. Not the full power of the Starborn, but enough to change everything. The quantum plague feeds on desire for power, Kira explained, the sword's light growing brighter. The more you grasp for control, the stronger it becomes. That's why we had to forget, to starve it, to weaken it, to give us all a chance to learn a better way. Above them, the battle had stopped as ships from all sides witnessed something extraordinary. The ancient facility was awakening fully now, its energy reaching out to touch every vessel in orbit. But instead of weapons, instead of power, it offered something else, truth. Every species in the galaxy had been shaped by humanity's choice to forget. Some, like the nomads, had been allies who chose to step back with them. Others had grown up in the vacuum left by the Starborn's absence. All of them were part of a plan millennia in the making. You want our power? Kira asked the Overseer. Here it is, the power to choose a different path. The power to remember not just what we were, but why we chose to forget. The sword's light reached its peak, connecting with the facility's spire in a display that could be seen from the Martian surface. The time of forgetting was ending, but this awakening would be different. This time, humanity would remember not just their power, but their responsibility. The real question was, could the galaxy accept this new balance, or would the quantum plague feed on their fear and desire, growing strong enough to break its ancient bonds? The Martian nexus thrummed with power as reality itself seemed to bend around them. In the central chamber, Kira stood facing Overseer NX-379, the ancient sword blazing with light that rippled through dimensions. Around them, both collective forces and coalition allies watched in stunned silence as the facility's awakening reached its peak. But something was wrong. The sword's light began to flicker, its steady pulse becoming erratic. Kira felt it first, a discordant note in the harmony of awakening memories, a shadow spreading through the light of revelation. No, she whispered, new understanding flooding her mind. It's already here. The shadows deepened, taking form in the spaces between moments. The quantum plague had been waiting, gathering strength from every grasp for power, every attempt to claim the legacy of the Starborn. Now, as humanity began to remember, it too was awakening. "What is this?" the Overseer demanded, their energy form fluctuating with distress as reality warped around them. "The price of power without wisdom," HFY answered, their scientific knowledge combining with ancient memories restored by the facility. "The thing that forced the Starborn to forget." The quantum plague manifested as shifting patches of anti-reality, spaces where the laws of physics broke down and consciousness itself began to fray. It fed on the very thing the collective had been pursuing, the desire for control, for dominance, for power over others. But this time, something was different. This time, humanity wasn't facing it alone. The nomad ships in orbit were the first to act, their organic hulls pulsing with energy patterns that echoed the sword's light. They remembered too, remembered being there when humanity made their great sacrifice, remembered choosing to guard the sleep of their allies. Through the facility's sensors, Kira watched as ships from every species began to align themselves in patterns that shouldn't have made sense, but did to the awakening memories of the Starborn. The hegemony's crystalline vessels, the free world's solar sails, even the collective's advanced warships, all moving together in an ancient dance of protection. "The sword was never meant to be a weapon," Kira said, understanding at last. "It's a key, not to power, but to unity." She raised the blade, feeling the truth of what needed to be done. The Starborn didn't fall because they were weak. They stepped back because they understood that true strength comes from lifting others up, not holding them down. The quantum plague surged, trying to feed on the power being channeled through the facility. But instead of fighting it directly, Kira did something unexpected. She lowered the sword. "We don't need to be what we were," she declared, looking at the Overseer, at the assembled forces of a dozen species. "We need to be what we can become, together." The sword's light changed, becoming softer, more diffuse. It spread through the chamber, touching each being present with a gentle illumination that carried understanding. Not the full knowledge of the Starborn, that was too much, too soon, but something more valuable, the wisdom to choose a different path. Above Mars, the combined fleet began to glow with the same light. The quantum plague, finding no hunger for power to feed on, no desire for dominance to corrupt, began to fade. It had been born from humanity's hubris, but it was being unmade by humanity's choice to embrace something greater than power. "The age of forgetting is over," Kira said, watching as the light spread across Mars, across the solar system, across human space. "But this isn't about reclaiming what we lost. It's about building something new." The sword's light pulsed one final time, and the facility's archives opened fully, not just to humans, but to all species. Within them lay not weapons or tools of power, but knowledge of how to grow, how to learn, how to build bridges between different ways of thinking and being. Overseer NX 379's energy form shifted, taking on a softer glow. "We sought to claim the power of the Starborn," they said, "but you offer us something greater, the chance to become Starborn ourselves." "Not Starborn," Kira corrected gently. "Something new. Something we create together." The sword's light had changed her, changed them all, but not by making them more powerful. Instead, it had awakened the capacity for understanding, for seeing beyond the boundaries of species and ideology to the connections that bound all conscious beings together. As the light of dawn broke over the Martian surface, Kira looked at HFY, at the Overseer, at all the beings gathered in that ancient place of power. The sword hummed softly in her grip, no longer a weapon or even a key, but a reminder of the choice that lay before them all. The age of the Starborn was over. The age of unity was beginning. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, other ancient powers stirred, watching to see what this new galaxy would become. The real question was no longer about what humanity had been, but what all species could become together. And that story was just beginning.